All right, well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming to this session. It's the second half of the second day, so we're kind of going down toward the end. One thing I was asked to mention as a housekeeping piece is immediately after this session for 30 minutes, the exhibit hall will remain open until 3:15. I've got four very good panelists today, two of which are from vendors, two of which are actually from companies that have implemented EVPs, enterprise video platforms. And I'd like each one of them to take just a few minutes, explain a little bit about their company, what their company does, both from a vendor standpoint as well as from an industry standpoint for Microsoft and Lockheed. And then talk a little bit about the trends that we're seeing in terms of enterprise. And at that point, Eric, I'll use your slides as part of that. So Dennis, we'll start with you.
Sure, thank you. So my name is Dennis. I'm the CTO of Media Platform. Media Platform is focused on providing a full EVP, essentially, for mostly Fortune 1000 companies. Our solution set is primarily focused on making sure that we cover the entire gambit. So it's some of the things that we're going to be talking about today, where an EVP is comprised of multiple pieces. Everything from the OVP component to making sure you can handle distribution properly, all the way to enterprise integration such as single sign-on, SharePoint integration, etc. So bringing all that together and having a holistic solution is essential within the enterprise. In terms of trends that we're seeing, we're definitely seeing a pickup in video. There's no doubt about that. Within the enterprise space, what's interesting is we're going from seeing a lot of companies that want to do or wanted to do corporate-controlled video platform, and they're moving to a very progressive model where they're starting to move towards employee-controlled video platform. And so it's one of the things worth considering simply because we're seeing that trend where you want to make sure that the video platform that you're looking at is able to support the corporate model where the managers and whatnot are controlling the content and pushing it to its employees, more to a model of social media and social networking where you're empowering employees to be able to create channels, create content, and do what they need to do in order to work within their individual departments, within their individual reach. So in terms of trends, in terms of just kind of general, the video space, we're seeing a huge explosion. I think one of the big drivers right now is actually social media and social networking that's also penetrating the enterprise today.
Eric.
I'm Eric Hards. I am a manager for our enterprise digital media department at Lockheed Martin and responsible for our current enterprise webcasting system architecture. I've been doing this for about 10 years, so the first webcast I did was let's plug a camera into a Canopus box and see if we can send a CTO webcast out. And ever since then, I've been making my network folks very unhappy. So I think a lot of the things that you said are very true in the enterprise space. My biggest concern is making sure that the camera, video, and audio show up on the desktop. And there's a lot of things in between that, and a lot of headaches in between that, and hopefully we'll get into some of at least my experiences and lessons learned that may help you. But we are actually in the process of expanding our system into sending out some RFPs to some vendors, and so we're also in the process of going beyond where we are today, getting into a much larger delivery of video because of what you said, Dennis, is that it's expanding at logarithmic rates and we want to be somewhat prepared.
And do you want to talk briefly to the current state?
Oh, yeah. So, great, thank you. This is our current architecture. It's based on Sonic Foundry's media site. And part of the reason why it was Sonic Foundry was because we're broken down into 5 business units at Lockheed Martin, and 4 of those business units each had their own instance of a Sonic Foundry architecture, which consisted of roughly 25 servers through Lockheed Martin and at least twice that number of encoders. And we found it with licensing agreement and hardware and software that it just made sense to consolidate, which is what we did into the architecture that you see here. That architecture is actually based on almost 2 versions old of what Sonic Foundry is currently supporting. The next slide is our future state architecture, and although you may not have had a chance to read all those boxes in the previous one, the largest changes that you'll see here is we're adding a transcoding server so that we can transcode the huge amount of content which is created in WMV Windows Media format into a H.264 format for mobile delivery, and that's primarily hasn't needed to happen up to this point because Lockheed Martin had 10,000 Blackberries out there, which are now becoming paperweights. And we're now delivering iOS devices. So now we have people saying, well, I have this beautiful iOS device that plays video, I want to watch a webcast. So that's one of the big issues there, and then also being able to deliver smooth streaming, so we're adding additional streaming servers and storage so that we can store all those different encoding profiles.
Okay. Interesting. Travis, Microsoft.
Thanks. My name is Travis Peter Tegan. I manage digital media for Microsoft Production Studios. And Microsoft Production Studios is Microsoft's internal media production arm. So we do everything from internal communications and training media to product launches and keynotes. So, and kind of everything in between. I come from more of the production and client side of the whole equation. So we're often tasked with trying to figure out how to get the message delivered and work very close with our IT teams and our internal platform teams to make sure the delivery happens. We are currently seeing the trends kind of that have already been discussed today, more move to mobile. Shocker, we are a Windows house, so Windows devices, and then moving to the cloud as well. We have our internal portal is called Academy. It's meant for sales readiness and training material, employees sharing information, and kind of like you mentioned, that was you can think of it as an internal YouTube. It's really designed so that employees can communicate to each other. There isn't necessarily a central agency managing what content gets put there, but there are kind of sponsored channels for all the different needs. But there are a lot of users within the company that are creating media just to let other employees learn from media. So we're seeing a lot of that, and we've recently pushed that architecture out into the cloud, into our SharePoint Online environment, to recognize, again, that a lot of our users are mobile now. They're connecting from home, they're connecting from hotels, and they want access to that content without necessarily having to log on to the corporate network to do that.
Great, thanks. Tom, trends that you're seeing?
Sure. Tom Weil, the CEO of RAMP. Our perspective on the challenge here is that video is really the new document, right? So that in the enterprise especially, things that people have traditionally done with documents, they're going to increasingly do with video. And so you sort of tie that to the reality that enterprises have invested billions of dollars in content management, knowledge management, search, all these kind of text-based platforms over the years, and video shows up and sort of disrupts all of that. So our core IP and our founding was around speech-to-text, natural language processing, and search technologies specifically for video. So we're able to create what is essentially a document to go with every video that we process on behalf of our customers, and then plug all of that into their existing platforms. So they're not forklifting all those investments they've made historically, and deliver that through enterprise YouTube-type experiences on SharePoint and other platforms. We have an app on the SharePoint Online store that just launched. And so, the things we're seeing are secure cloud is certainly very interesting to a lot of customers right now. I think not every customer can support that. I think Eric will talk about that a bit. Mobile, for sure, is exploding. Search and discovery, which is, what I referenced around sort of video as the new document. And then integration with existing platforms. So those are the requirements that we're seeing as we see, RFPs and RFIs, and the pace of which are increasing. So I think, 2014 is going to be an interesting year for the kind of enterprise YouTube concept.
Okay, good. Travis, come back to you real quick for a second. Of course, there's a fairly well-known product that's getting ready to be relaunched here in the next couple of days from Microsoft. Talk a little bit about what you would do from the production side would deal with outward-facing as well as inward-facing, because obviously there's probably content that you produce that gets used both ways. For the audience, how does that work from an enterprise standpoint in repurposing that content and choosing where it ends up?
Sure. So we do rebroadcast that. I'm guessing you're speaking to the Xbox launch.
I was going to let you say it.
Potentially arising. So we'll, for a large event that is external facing, we will still do an internal version of it because we've kind of created a pathway through our corporate network that makes that more viable and feasible. So we will live encode and deliver that content to any number of places, from a product launch site to Xbox Live and a lot of different partner sites that might carry that launch. But then additionally, we'll do an encrypted version of that same event, and we'll send that through a path that allows, surfaces it on our internal SharePoint platform so that employees can come to that site and be directed to content. And so when they're on CorpNet, that gets cached and distributed in a different way that either leverages internal caching or internal CDN type behavior or a multicast experience. So really, that doesn't necessarily mean those employees will choose to go to that experience, and sometimes that can be a problem if folks decide they want to all go to the external facing version of that show. But we try to encourage it and communicate, and typically if people do go to the external experience and have problems because of network bottlenecking, they know where to go internally to get that same content.
Eric, I know multicast is a really big part of what Lockheed does with its systems internally. Do you want to talk a little bit to that as well, and how things are handled if it's a public-facing event that also has a very large internal audience that's viewing it?
Yeah, so I would say that 99% of what Lockheed Martin produces is internal. So, and even if it is external, it's external. So the event is external, the streaming is usually through an external provider, and it doesn't have to transverse the firewall. Okay. So we don't have, we've had requests, but as you can imagine with Lockheed Martin, even if it's external, it's a defined audience. So in most cases, the security of the event and who's watching is more important than making it available to all to watch. So external, we don't have as many issues because it's all external. There's no transversing of the firewall. Internally, we rely heavily on multicast. We don't currently have a CDN environment at all, and we're delivering in cases, 3,000 or 4,000 connections for an all-hands kind of meeting. Is all multicast. I would say of the 3,000 connections, only about 400 of them are unicast. Everyone else is a multicast. And we would not be able to do, in our current network environment, a unicast of 4,000 or 5,000 for a live event. So as we're trying to ride the tails of what Microsoft is doing with multicast and smooth streaming, as they haven't announced that product as of yet, we're also looking at expanding into our own internal CDN, which is, in the process we're doing right now is actually going out to RFP for an internal CDN to support certainly smooth streaming, but to go to a much larger number without having to use multicast.
Okay. And that segues nicely into a question for both Dennis and Tom is, do you see that trend for internal eCDNs as being something that's gaining popularity both for live and on-demand content, or just for primarily live events?
Yeah, we're seeing, we've always seen a very high pain point for live delivery within the enterprise. That's always been true. There's a lot of ways to skin that cat. So I think what we would advise is that you make sure that you have, all the options lined up, because what you're going to find out within almost any enterprise network is that you're going to have segmented parts of your network where certain things will work and certain things won't. So ECDN is definitely one option that should be considered, where you might have an edge node, a media server that's going to stream to, say, your LA office. But your New York office might support multicast, so why not use multicast? The San Francisco office might support P2P because there's certain ports that are open. Why not do P2P there? So I think what makes the most sense is to make sure that you're flexible and you're basically being cost efficient. There's no reason to deploy a CDN, eCDN corporate-wide if you don't need to. Obviously, you can throw money at it and go that route. But if you already have existing network infrastructure that supports certain things such as riverbeds for HTTP stream splitting, again, multicast, P2P, and so on, use a combination of those. And that tends to be the most cost-effective and most efficient way to move forward.
Yeah, and I think that, the move towards mobile, while a bit early, means that, so one customer we recently signed, in the pharma industry, they've got about 4,000 people in the field, and they have issued all tablets to the whole field. And so, they want to avoid hitting the corporate networks, if at all possible, with video distribution. So they're looking at public clouds as long as you can secure the stream. and not ride on an ECDN or just straight up on the network at all. So I think that's more for on-demand content than live though.
Okay. I guess that though brings up an interesting question, and Eric, when you mentioned the fact that you couldn't handle 4,000 to 5,000 external or unicast at this point, when you have employees on mobile devices, they're obviously receiving it as a unicast as opposed to a multicast. So is there a point at which, as we stand today, we have to sort of limit the number of potential live employee viewers who are sitting outside the corporate network as the road warriors from watching the content live and just force them into the on-demand scenario?
That's a good question. It's actually funny that you say that because I'm more worried about the on-demand content than I am the live content.
Okay.
And that's primarily because as I think everyone in the room knows, that your numbers in the on-demand are much higher than the live. And you're correct in that not only am I dealing with the fact that we use telcos for our delivery, we don't have our own wireless for our mobile devices. So we have delivery out as a unicast from the system to the externals, but those same devices, when they're internal to the buildings within Lockheed Martin, also share the same wireless bandwidth that anyone else who's wireless on. So I've kind of been waving my hand saying, is anyone thinking about the fact that we're going to be taking up more bandwidth once these devices are out there on video, and oh, by the way, you're going to be using the shared bandwidth that our wireless network already uses for all of our wireless devices on these mobile devices. And I think there's a good conversation happening about that, but I haven't seen anyone come and say, well, yeah, we need more bandwidth yet. So I think what's going to happen is it's going to build it and see what happens. I think they're going to say, wow, we never expected there was going to be that much video, so maybe we should look at adding more bandwidth. But right now, there is no real plan that says, well, how many are we going to have? How many videos are we going to deliver? Those kinds of numbers aren't being asked, and I would say that if you're in that mode right now, you should be asking those kinds of numbers because they concern me based on shared wireless bandwidth and the fact that we currently will be delivering to these mobile devices. The only benefit that I do have is Lockheed Martin does not provide wireless devices to every employee. So I know that there's a limited number of devices that I have to deliver to, so I can at least plan for that for the enterprise system. Sure. I cannot plan for that for the wireless bandwidth.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a very good point. And it's intriguing. I wrote an article recently on mobile in the enterprise, and it does seem to be those questions are only just now being asked, where when I'd written an original article back in 2009, it seemed like people were poised to ask the question, but we still seem either to be slower at the uptake on mobile, or the systems were just built in such a way that they couldn't handle mobile at all.
Well, I know at Lockheed Martin, it's just getting to the point of getting outside of BlackBerry and delivering an iOS device that can connect to our infrastructure. That's really what they're focused on. But there's a lot of things that opens up, as we know, right? As soon as you connect an iOS device to my back-end network, you can stream video to it. Mm-hmm. And that means I'm going to offer that as a service until somebody says, don't offer that anymore. So yeah, and I'm in the meetings and I'm raising my hand and saying those things, but I'm just not sure that anyone's really listening just yet.
Travis, and this may be one of those third rail questions. You're at Microsoft Studios. How many other mobile platforms do you have to support from a content standpoint versus just the Windows phone?
Well, internally, we're pretty lucky in that we can stay in kind of a Windows environment and satisfy our needs, and employees get it, right? Externally, though, when
employees get it, meaning they get a Windows phone as opposed to an iPhone.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, just to be clear, the devices we support internally are PCs, laptops, Windows devices. Okay. But externally, we do a lot of keynotes and product launches and all kinds of events that exist to target people who are not on those devices yet. So when we look at an external facing event, then we look at the real world audience and what we need to deliver. And so we're delivering the flavors of HLS, HDS, smooth streams, usually quite a variety of streams that we can hit pretty much every device. And the same is true for playback, flash where we need flash, Silverlight where we can use Silverlight. And so it's kind of, we're very audience-centric when it comes to delivery.
Good, very cool. I'm going to stop with questions here for a second and just ask a question of the audience. How many people here are in a company that already has an EVP? And how many are in companies that are considering EVPs? Okay. Those of you who are in companies that have EVPs, I think there were about 6 of you, what are the mobile solutions that are provided or suggested within your company, or are there mobile solutions? And actually, if we could get a microphone out real quick, a handheld. Okay. Do you have one of the handhelds? Okay. All right. And then I'll repeat it for the video. Okay. So you're sending Akamai the multiple streams, multiple streams, unicast, and then Akamai is providing that to all the mobile device users who are on that particular webcast that you're doing. How do you secure that, or is that up to Akamai to secure it? Okay.
So we have all that integrations. You have to be able to get into. We have external web servers that are in DMZ, so that become externally. We still authenticate you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Just to quickly recap that, so what they're doing is anybody who's internal, who's on a mobile device, is actually watching it through Akamai, through the CDN delivery. Kumu is pushing single bitrate streams out to Akamai. Akamai is then providing multi-bitrate capability to those mobile devices that are capable of that. And the security that's being used is effectively LDAP from an internal standpoint, or DMZ, the no man's land for customers who aren't actually employees. Anybody else who's part of who has an EVP, how are you handling mobile?
So we actually we do internal platform that we're going to split streaming Ustream, but we don't really typically do mobile except for larger corporate events. When we do that, we split stream to Ustream. We redirect people to that application.
So employees on mobile devices would go to Ustream on that split stream. Okay.
They're wrapped within a corporate side of that network.
So the app itself would only be available to the employees, and is there any other security beyond that?
There is, so Ustream provides a federal password for the player.
Okay.
For the players, so that's been helpful, but we're working towards SSO. Yeah.
All right, great. Thank you. From the two vendors' standpoint, anything that's been mentioned here that you all have faced or have some suggestions around? Tom, you could...
Yeah, I think, so we focus more on on-demand than live, as sort of the context for my comments, but we're pure cloud-based, so the content all gets pushed up into our cloud, and then our cloud is sort of fronted by, a variety of CDNs a customer can choose, or we can provide that. And we've built a URL notary, and that's how we secure the streams from the cloud. So that's integrated with Active Directory, so you're authenticated, and then you get a sort of a one-time use URL. Each individual gets a one-time use URL, so you can't pass the URL around, things like that,
Okay.
for on-demand content.
Yeah, I think what we've heard is the most common way that people are delivering to mobile, because to mobile it's going to be unicast. So typically what companies are doing is they're sending it to Akamai and letting Akamai deliver basically over the internet. The alternative would be building out that eCDN, so you could do unicast internally, but obviously there's cost to that. There's going to be a lot of process of getting that in place. The only other thing I would add to doing delivery from Akamai is your application is going to be handling authentication and authorization, obviously, to make sure that only the right people can watch it. That doesn't mean the stream is protected. So I think this is what Tim was trying to get at. One thing that you want to make sure is because you're going out over the public internet, don't trust that somebody won't be able to get to the stream. You want to further protect the stream by doing, something called token authentication, which is supported by Akamai, it's supported by other CDNs as well. And what that does is it allows your EVP application to work with the CDN so that both applications have to be in concert on the token in order to make that stream available. So, one possible pitfall is, you'd think that you've got security through obscurity when you don't. The other thing that you can do is make sure that the stream is locked down to your EVP player so that nobody else can play that stream unless it's from a player that's signed and accepted by Akamai. So those are a couple things that you can easily put in place that will go a long ways towards making sure that even though you're delivering over the internet just for mobile, that you still have security in place.
Okay, good, great. For the actual implementations, and so this goes to Eric and Travis. And Travis, I understand you're on the production side as opposed to necessarily the distribution side. But for the two of you, any recommendations on vendors and, when you kind of built the platform, you built it around it, why did you use those particular vendors? I guess, Travis, from your standpoint, it could be camera editing as well as video switching, and obviously, Eric, from your standpoint, it's everything on the distribution side of it.
Yeah, and I can start. We can. We're a full broadcast facility, so we are kind of a live hub as well. So you could kind of almost think of us as a teleport. A lot of times we're bringing content in, or we're adding production to it on site. So we have kind of a full end-to-end production studio facility at Microsoft. When it comes to actual delivery, because of the fact that we are very audience-centric and we want to include a lot of different pretty much every audience scenario we can think of. We actually use elemental GPU encoding for actually doing the encodes. Because we're Microsoft, we like to make a lot of the components of the platform, and we kind of also think of ourselves as our own testers of the technology. So our platform lives in SharePoint, which is sitting in our cloud. And then we encrypt with PlayReady, so that's how we feel comfortable sending content out onto the open internet. We encrypt with PlayReady. We keep the keys behind authenticated SharePoint environments. So I actually love it when our viewers go home to watch content, because then I don't have to worry about the corporate bandwidth, and folks can get a pretty good experience from their homes. And then when they're internal, typically when they're on their phones, they're getting it from their actual cell provider. But on a device, we do run into the problems you spoke of about congestion on wireless networks, because those are at the end of the day going to be a unicast stream. So our answer to that is we're actually beefing up some of our wireless networks where people are congregating on wireless. And we do run into the problem occasionally as well where folks who think they're wired actually aren't, because for whatever reason their system is hanging out on the wireless network instead of switching over to the wired network. So that happens at times. So we're working on kind of boosting our wireless networks all around.
You mentioned the fact that Microsoft does many of the components, Windows Azure Media Services. Is that actually something that's used in production on within the Microsoft campus, or is it something that's...
Right now we're building it into production. It's Windows Azure Media Services are being used for on-demand transcoding. And so we're using that now. We're doing testing now against live Azure Media Services. And so our ultimate objective is to, in the early stage, send a single smooth stream into Azure and transmux it into all the formats that we want in the live environment. So we're testing that now. Down the road, we'll be transitioning that to a single high-res bit rate into Azure, and then have that just automatically create all of our deliverables and hand it off to the CDN.
So transrating as well as...
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things I would add, just kind of as a side note, I also manage a group of production folks, but the production is kind of handled a little differently at Lockheed Martin. Each of the business units have their own production facilities, and they take advantage of the enterprise system that you saw here. So the business units do their own production, Some of them have studios, some of them don't. A lot of the webcasts are done in conference rooms or in offices. And then those are pumped out to the enterprise system for watching within those business units. But looking at, what vendors, so Lockheed Martin is very strict in not saying anything about any vendor, so I won't put it that way, but like I said, we do currently use the Sonic Foundry system, and that was primarily chosen because when we looked at those costs of why 4 of our 5 business units are using it, just made sense to combine them into the single system. We're completely open, however, to the next generation system, which will be beyond the 2 that we just showed. And like I said, we're currently working on an RFP to go out to some of the vendors. And it's primarily going to be how well is it going to meet a lot of the requirements, a lot of the issues that we have today, as far as, how are we going to deliver to wireless devices efficiently? How are we going to use unicast with or without a CDN? So we're very open. We haven't really decided yet who's going to be on the list, but it's primarily going to go out to a bunch of people, and we're going to see what we get. So it'll be interesting to see what falls out of that, and then what kind of technologies and the costs that are associated with that, and whether or not we even change based on the things that we all trying to figure out is cost versus what kind of benefits we're going to get out of the system.
Now, you mentioned the 4 out of 5, and I remember when I wrote an article in 2009, there was indeed another vendor that was being used for that 5th one. What kind of internal political angst did that particular business unit go through, having to switch over to the system that everybody else was using? Because, of course, politics in silos.
Never have that problem. Yeah. Right. The way we dealt with that is we avoided it completely. I know that sounds but it's true. Actually, what we did is we took the 4 of the 5 business units and moved them all to the common platform, and we left the 5th business unit alone. Okay. And they currently are using Kumu's product, but they are an integral part of the next generation RFP. So the goal is to move all of us onto a single common platform.
So the political approach there was, say, what are we going to do next?
Right, yeah. So we didn't want to even try and approach it because their requirements were dramatically different from the other business units. So instead we said, okay, we're not going to bring you on at this time, but you will be involved in the RFP because you will become part of this once we go to something that you're happy with as far as the system's concerned. And we also talked real briefly about the cloud. I was going to mention that Lockheed Martin is obviously very strict about what they put externally and what they don't put externally, and clouds are just not a choice for Lockheed Martin. But I would say if it is a choice for you based on what I've seen, and certainly the growth that we've seen over the last, what do we say, 3 years or so, I would drop what I have internally probably today and look at cloud vendors really heavily because of the amount of resources it takes to solve individual problems internal to our organization. So just as a recommendation.
Okay, good. Tom, one of the things we talked about a couple days ago, I guess, was the idea of taking content, say the speech-to-text conversion, turning it into the text that sits around on demand. And yesterday there was a session about captioning requirements, and of course, captioning isn't necessarily a requirement for internal. It is obviously for external.
For television, yeah.
For television. And CVAA and the like. What do you find in terms of the benefits of taking that speech-to-text conversion approach, both in terms of captioning as well as in terms of search granularity?
Yeah, that's right. I think you have to separate the two. Automated speech recognition, natural language processing, those are really search and discovery approaches. So the benefits of an automated approach is that it's much, much faster. So, in our case, if you put a video into our cloud, if it's a 5-minute video, we have it indexed in 6 minutes. So, very rapid turnaround. Whereas with human captioning, you're talking usually about, a day or 2 before you're going to get a video human captioned. So if you're dumping that metadata into a search engine or a search index like ours, or you're integrating into an existing enterprise search platform that you might be using like Google Search Appliance or Endeca or Microsoft SharePoint native search, then all of a sudden the videos are showing up in search results on an even playing field with the documents and so forth that they're included with. Captioning is the user experience piece of this, right? So you may decide that some videos need captions or even translations, right, depending on if you have a global workforce. But that is a different stack. It's more expensive and has a different use case. So we encourage customers to kind of think about them independently and make the decisions independently, and then apply the right approach, depending on what they're envisioning the use case to be.
Okay, good. Dennis, how does Media Platform handle search from a tech standpoint as well as things like captioning?
Sure. So right now, we support basically closed captioning and transcription services. So one of our partners is 3Play Media. They provide us with two forms of transcription services. One is fully automated, where it goes through a technology that they have licensed that will get us the transcript fairly quickly. It won't take a day because there's no human intervention involved. It's a lot cheaper, so we can apply it to a lot more videos. The other level is full transcription services. Obviously, it's more costly. It's going to have a day turnaround and whatnot. So that's in place today, and most of our customers use that. Obviously, the benefits of having that is you have the transcript, it's searchable, and you have the closed captioning. One of the things that we're also looking into because of customer demand is things such as what RAMP provides and phonetic search, where the goal is not for closed captioning purposes, but the goal is to have this metadata simply for searchability. So with companies like Nexidia and others, they might do phonetic search where they're able to do a much better job of making the content searchable because they don't have to worry about high accuracy in terms of going from speech to text because they're doing phonetics. And so that tends to work a lot better if you want to simply focus on search.
Okay. Good, very good. All right, we had said that we were going to try to leave 20 minutes for question and answer, and I think what I'm probably going to do is just take my mic off and bring it down there for people to use, unless you've got another hand.
If you turn that one off, I have a hand.
Okay, great.
Just they're on the same channel.
Sure. So who has a question?
We overwhelmed them.
Anybody?
Hi, I'm Alex from Blizzard Entertainment. We're looking at an EVP, and one of the bigger challenges we have is actually live as opposed to VOD. We're a video game company, and whenever there's a large video game event or a live stream going on for competitive sports or esports, our external bandwidth just tanks because we have 6,000, 10,000 employees trying to watch one stream. I'm curious how your services for the vendors help with that, as well as building the VOD platform and keeping that all self-contained within the intranet through secure means and DRM protection as well for the VOD.
Are you doing your own distribution internally, or are you using one of the providers?
Right now, we're not doing anything. Right now, it's all, if there's a live stream, it's an external live stream coming in, so that's just to mitigate the bandwidth. But currently for internal video, we don't have any internal video. Other than just, it goes up on a server and you download it and you play it locally.
Oh, so these are video streams coming from the internet?
From the internet.
Okay.
And we're trying to alleviate some of that bandwidth. But also at the same time, we want to do internal streams and internal VODs.
And what kind of numbers would you have of people doing all this cool stuff?
I wish my network guy was here because he could tell you exactly. But off the top of my head, if I were to guess, probably about 30% of our user base, or of our employee base, would view those major streams. So like 4,000 people probably.
Okay. Yeah, I can address that one. So I think you're talking about a scenario where you've got a video feed going out and you want to make sure that the public internet can see it, but because you have so many people within your company that watch at the same time, you're having trouble with internal distribution. What we would generally recommend, or what we've seen customers do, is they'll send it out to a CDN like Akamai, and they'll also send the stream out to an internal media server behind the firewall. So you're basically sending the same stream to two different places in parallel. The purpose of sending the stream inside the firewall is that that becomes the first hop of the stream within your network, and from there you can either go unicast, you can go multicast, and you can go P2P, or you can even do HTTP delivery if you had HTTP acceleration devices within your network. So, that's the first step. The second step is figuring out which one of the many options I just mentioned would work based on, what capabilities your network has. But the first thing you have to do is make sure that you've got that same stream, making it behind your firewall and having some internal presence for distribution.
So Dennis, maybe one of the other models that I think I hear you talking about too would be some big event, the presidential inauguration, something like that, where multiple people within your organization internally are going to watch that event. How do you mitigate the fact that 4,000 employees are trying to watch the exact same external stream at the same time?
Yeah, and you're probably talking more about doing something like a Blue Code or a Riverbed device that would cache that incoming and then distribute it locally as opposed to pulling them all through your firewall. And then it could be distributed as a P2P or some various different formats based on that cache that's come through the firewall. So if they are 4,000 streams that are being pulled by your individual employees of somebody else's content, then you're probably going to need some kind of caching devices at the firewall coming in.
Yeah, you actually have an advantage with live versus VOD. If you're pulling 4,000 different VOD streams, you might be out of luck. But because you're pulling 4,000 streams of the same stream, you actually have a lot of options, because you can use blue codes to make sure that it's being cached properly and whatnot. Because it's a single stream, you have the capability of potentially limiting the bandwidth, at least at the WAN, to a single stream. And then within the LAN, presumably you have enough bandwidth to go to the 4,000 users at that point.
Okay. Any of you want to add anything?
We've actually been doing some of those kinds of experiments as well, for the exact same reason. We do a big external event, a lot of people want to watch it, so kind of to what has already been discussed, we're working in kind of the internal CDN mentality, where it caches the first stream or a handful of streams in from the internet, and then distributes it smartly.
Even if it's not a full-blown CDN, the idea of a transparent cache that sits somewhere within the network.
Correct.
Okay, good. Other questions? Let me ask about multicast on mobile, and obviously we talked a bit about mobile. Mobile's unicast. We've got EMVMS, which is coming out in the LTE space. Is that from the integration standpoint, Eric, as you guys are looking at mobile device delivery, working with external vendors that, say, a Verizon and AT&T, to actually do a multicast across the mobile?
It's a little bit lower on the radar, primarily because our current wireless network, so the Wi-Fi, if you will, is not multicast enabled, which is more of a concern for me than the cellular would be right now. Also, like I said, we have a limited number of devices, a company that has 150,000 plus employees, but probably 10% of those actually have Lockheed Martin devices that can be on the Lockheed Martin network. And since I have no external currently, you have to be on the Lockheed Martin network. So I have a relatively small number that I have to deal with for multicast delivery for a live event. Now, with that said, I don't have my 15,000 BlackBerries replaced yet. I don't have mobile delivery capability yet, and I don't have those iOS devices yet on the network. So it is kind of yet to be seen to see how popular is it going to be to watch that on my iPhone or my iPad during a live event. So it's again going back to that, well, let's build it and see what happens. And that's kind of how we're taking the approach. But I have a relatively low risk because I have a finite number of mobile devices I have to deal with.
Okay. Travis, when you mentioned that you like it when people go home and watch the content because you don't have to deal with it internally on the network, do you keep track of kind of percentages across different types of devices? Who's watching on an Xbox, who's watching on an iOS, who's watching on a Windows phone, that type of thing?
Not too much around tracking the actual device. We definitely track who's watching from off the network and on the network, how much is hitting over a wireless IP versus something wired, but we don't actually parse out the individual clients, and probably part of that is because they're all like flavors. So we don't have to do much to adjust there. We really just want to know where the users are and which networks they're crossing.
Sure. Okay. So in terms of understanding whether you'd need HLS for iOS 5 or iOS 6 or iOS 7, and same thing on the Android side, that's not as much a concern as it is making sure that the delivery is pushed through. You kind of use a generic streaming type?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
For me, we are pretty, we all have kind of a similar set of devices and stuff. So when I'm serving the company and our own employees, that part's actually pretty easy for me.
Okay, good. One more request for questions if anybody has a question.
So I'm curious about the people that are doing the wireless over the cellular networks, because it seems like that has the potential to really drive up the data bills. And I'm wondering if people had done an analysis of what it actually costs to, boost your bandwidth up to 10 gigs a month or whatever if you're watching a lot of video on those devices versus building the eCDN. Because I had a client that they did not want any of the wireless traffic to go out the network, but it did require them to basically upgrade their entire wireless infrastructure to, I think they went to AC for improved throughput as well as multicast capabilities. But that was just an interesting thing to me, because I would think that you'd want to keep that all internal and have your users be using the Wi-Fi network.
So that's an interesting point. If it's an employee on a company-issued device, and the device has 2.5 or 3 gigabytes a month worth of consumption, what happens when they move beyond that? That's part of what you're asking? Is that, within Microsoft and Lockheed, BlackBerry, obviously, it's sort of an unlimited model, but it's unlimited and you can't do a whole lot with it.
I can't stream to it.
Right. But as you move forward with, say, device and service provider contracts, is that something that has to be addressed? I have a Fortune 500 company that has its headquarters in the city in which I live, and they have opted not to go with unlimited data on many of the executives' devices because they were finding heavy video consumption, and their thought was maybe they could actually pare it back. And it wasn't heavy video consumption of company
Business
content, it was other content.
I know, well, again, we're just now rolling out iOS devices, so I don't think it's even, I'm sure that there are people who know what plans that they're going to be purchasing. I do not, so I don't know if it's going to be unlimited or not. And I think in our case, it is going back to, well, let's just see what happens. I would agree with you that I have a good hunch, if you will, that the video content from my services is not going to be equivalent to the video content of other services. So the problem I foresee in that, however, is when they come back and say, Eric, we're getting killed on video on iOS devices, and I'm going to say, well, have you looked to see what that content is? Because it's probably not from me. Am I going to get blamed for the fact that they're watching YouTube videos versus my webcast, right?
And the answer is yes.
And yeah, most likely. So I have to figure out how I'm going to protect that data. So I'm going to have the ability to say, well, let me show you exactly how many iOS devices have accessed video content within the last 3 months. And here's the amount of data that was transversed. So I'll be able to say, yeah, of all of these particular devices that are going in the gigabits range of data, I'm only delivering, several hundred kilobits of data. So it's not me that's the issue. And I really don't think I will be, honestly, given what I expect my audience to watch, which is I've got the guy in an airport who really wants to see his president's all hands but can't. And so he's going to tune in that one time he's either not on the plane or not in the car. So that's where I expect to see my mobile device usage, and I would expect it to be low compared to other video devices. So it'll be interesting if we have this talk next year, if I'll be able to tell you that.
And Travis, I want your feedback on that too, but one thing you said, Eric, that just made me think, all of us who sit on an airplane that have GoGo, of course, GoGo specifically says not, don't use it for
stream,
streaming.
yeah, right.
And on the flight that I was in, on the way to LAX from Atlanta, happened to be on an international configured, which had no Wi-Fi, and the grumbling around me was amazing. But I guess it brings up a question of what happens when you have someone on a mobile device who can't watch the content. Who do they blame besides you?
They always blame me.
And how do you address that? And Travis, same question for you. How do you address that best effort or quality of service issue when they're trying to watch that type of thing?
I actually look at it as a way to address other issues I may be having. In a lot of cases, I've tried to architect a system to be ahead of the technology so that when they say, well, Eric, we want video on our mobile devices immediately, I can say, well, the system's ready. I can deliver today. However, the network's not ready, or your devices aren't there, or the Wi-Fi isn't capable. So I have the ability, at least from my planning perspective, to say, I'm going to supply it because it doesn't really cost me a lot more to say I have that capability. But the other things which are out of my control, the network, the Wi-Fi, the iOS devices itself, I will say we're ready, but you guys have to be ready. You have to understand that you might go overage on your data if you're going to deliver video. You have to understand that the Wi-Fi is not capable of delivering multicast, and you could ultimately have more congestion because it's a shared Wi-Fi. So mine's kind of I'm very risk averse, so I didn't want to be thrown to the wolves that, well, Eric's system's not ready to deliver mobile. Well, no, it is. Now let's talk about all of these other problems that are with the system.
Okay, good. Travis?
Yeah, and for us, on your latter question, it's they're upset usually. They usually start this conversation with, it's 2013, why can't we something. And with that, it's really just all we can do at that point is educate. And folks are usually pretty reasonable when you start to lay out the complete landscape they're up against and what's happening. And we find if you don't just shrug it off and you actually take a moment to let them know all of the factors at play, that they're usually pretty understanding of those situations. It's when they feel like you just failed to deliver it for them and you're not going to respond that we get the most upset response. In terms of the bandwidth question, that's an area we haven't really looked at yet. Today we're focused on just getting you the content, and we haven't looked at the impacts of getting you that content and what that might do. But the Microsoft crowd is also pretty savvy around how much data they have and their data plans, and so it hasn't really been a problem for us.
I think the other issue is that mobile and cellular are not synonymous, right? You could have a mobile device, but you're using it, especially, let's say you're a field salesperson, you have a home office, with a Fios internet connection, you've got no problem at all, or you're at a hotel. No, there's issues like GoGo, or Starbucks, if you're trying to watch a lot of video, they're either going to block you or it's going to be an issue. But I think that's also getting better as time goes on, that it's not just cellular and mobile, it's mobile and Wi-Fi or mobile and home office, et cetera.
Well, and I think it brings up an interesting correlation to one of the things Travis said, where somebody might think they're on the wired network when in reality they're on the wireless network, the Wi-Fi network. I think the same is true with mobile devices. We assume when we walk into our home office that it does actually glom on to the Wi-Fi and let us watch it at bigger bandwidth. But some apps are designed to basically stick with the network they're on until such a time as you get out of them and get back into them and have those kinds of issues. All right, any closing thoughts from you guys? And Tom, I'll start on your end.
Closing thoughts.
Maybe what are some of the future issues that you see in the next year that people might expect between now and the time they come back to Stream Media West 14?
I think social is a big question. I think between Yammer and Jive and those kind of systems, how that intersects with video and how can video become more of a sort of a catalyst for social rating, commenting, sharing. I think that's a kind of a new frontier in the enterprise, and video will play a prominent role there.
Okay. Travis?
I think the use of the cloud and how that intersects with the on-premise network will be an interesting space, because whether it's the scenario from the audience where you had nothing to do with generating the content or content you're creating yourself, folks are more and more pulling resources of the corporation in from the cloud. And as they do that, there needs to be smart ways to bring it in and move it around. So there's kind of this cloud meets on-prem solution that I think is still being worked out a little bit.
Yeah, hybrid models, I think, are going to be a
Yep.
really big
Yeah.
deal
Yep.
from that standpoint.
I think that I have two things. One, we really touched on the mobile delivery thing. I think it's relatively new for the enterprise side. Not only having the device that can actually receive and stream the video, but also how planning for it to get out there. The other interesting thing is how long is it going to be, and you're probably not delivering HD, are you? Are you delivering HD?
HD adaptive.
Okay, okay. So we're not delivering HD at all, and it comes down to the business case, right? You know, can I deliver HD, and is there a business reason for having that bandwidth and for having that production value? And currently, we don't, even though it's being asked for. So I think those two things will be interesting to see how it rolls out in the enterprise.
So your content that's live is not HD on the delivery side. What about the on-demand content? Is it recorded in HD?
Not
So
even
it's
recorded in
all
HD.
standard?
Well, it's recorded in HD, but the on-demand's not HD either.
It's pushed to the standard def.
Right.
Okay, interesting. Dennis?
Yeah, I just want to quickly comment on what Travis was saying. Hybrid is definitely something we didn't talk too much about, but it is something definitely worth considering. A majority of our customers, enterprise customers, are actually hybrid. So they take advantage of what we have in the cloud, and they install media service behind the firewall for the exact reason one of the questions was asked, where they want all the services in the cloud and not have to worry about it, but as a consequence of video, they need at least one server or more behind the firewall to handle the delivery and distribution needs.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Well, if you would join me in giving a hand to our panelists.